Before we dive in, Healthiest Humans and this podcast series are separate from my professional work as a pharmacist at Metro Market. All views expressed here are for informational and educational purposes only. We do not provide medical or any other professional advice. In fact, we recommend seeking professional counsel before making any decisions based on the information provided. With that, welcome to the Healthiest Voice podcast. I'm Christopher Millen, your host and the founder of Healthiest Humans. Today, we're diving into the science of social connections, why family and friends keep us alive. Our special guest, Susan Smith Winchester, is with us in the house to help us unpack this topic. Hi, Susan. Thank you
Hi,
for joining
Christo.
us.
It's a pleasure. Hi, everybody.
As with every podcast, I open and close the podcast with an audience-directed question. So here's today's question. Are we as humans designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore? I'm asking this from a human biology perspective. Think epigenetics. In our digitally embedded world, we are as humans designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore. But later on in the podcast, we will circle back to that and gather your thoughts. As you may know, in the overarching architecture of Healthiest Humans, our vision is to democratize human health, and our mission is to empower humans. Simply put, we are on a mission to help design the best health system in the world, which is the human body when it actually functions in its optimal state of being. With that, let me introduce Susan. Susan is a wife, she's a mother, a seasoned equestrian, an executive HR leader, author, keynote speaker, and a TEDx speaker. Some of her roles over the last 36 years, worth mentioning, is Chief HR Officer at Applied Materials, Rockwell Automation. She's a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources. She served on the executive committee of the Peer Roundtable for Chief Human Resource Officers. She chairs the Leadership Advisory Board at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering, and she's an active member of the Society for Human Resources Management Executive Network. We are super grateful to have you on the podcast, Susan. The floor is yours.
Well, I always joke my middle name is HR. I can't help myself. I retired a year ago, and I'm still doing all kinds of things related to that work just because I love it so much. And I love the topic that we're talking about today, which is all about human connection. And Christo, you and I have been friends for a long time, and I really appreciate the mission that you have to really teach all of us how to be healthier and how to have a high quality life with longevity, high quality as well as long life. And I think this whole topic of the connections that we have with people is really key. And I'm really, one of the places I really thought was important to start is the most important relationship I think we have to have is a great relationship with ourselves. And when I think a little bit about my story and listening to you talk a little bit about my background, it sounds great. My career sounds great, and I've had a great career. But what a lot of people don't know about me is that for 30 of those 36 years, my success was completely fueled by an underlying belief about myself that I wasn't good enough. And we all have different experiences when we're growing up, when we're kids. I think our parents do the very best job that they can. And sometimes it can be a challenging childhood. And I will share that part of the story that's important is that I had a dad who was very successful in his career. And he was a really smart man. There were a lot of great, wonderful qualities about him. He's no longer living. And he also had some issues related to unpredictable rage. It's just part of his nature and part of his background. And the point of sharing that is that I came to believe unconsciously when I was little that it was everybody else's job to determine my worth and value. I was constantly trying to figure out how to stay hypervigilant around a person like that so I could feel safe and create some sense of security. And I believe my job was to be as perfect and as people-pleasing as possible to gain that external validation. And so, kind of starting this whole discussion off about our relationships with others, I think we have to first start and really examine our relationship with ourselves. And I would say that the majority of my career was really, I was in an unconscious state. I call it living the unconscious wounded career path, where I go into work every single day. I try to prove myself. I believe I had to prove myself over and over and over again. And I would go home at the end of the day and I would replay my entire day through the lens of nothing I did was right. I should have spoken up. I should not have spoken up. I think somebody's mad at me. I'm pretty sure I deserve it. And it was really this, it was like a hamster on one of those wheels, just caught in this loop for years. And I know because I've had the privilege of working with a lot of extremely talented, high level, overachieving people that we never really learn, at least I never did, and a lot of people haven't, how to manage that anxiety and how to manage that negativity that we're experiencing when we don't feel like we're enough. And we turn to unhealthy self-soothing habits. It could be lots of things. For me, it was alcohol. I used alcohol to try to numb that stress and anxiety, to calm that constantly activated, reptilian brain that was always in fight, flight, or freeze. And it's really key to understand that when we're activated like this, we have to find some way to calm our nervous system. And again, this is why it's so critical, the work, Crystal, that you're doing, is how do you really manage some of these forces that so many of us experience in our professional lives. I'm certainly not a mental health worker. I'm an expert career and workplace person for sure. But I think it's really key that we start with ourselves and we start to think about how are we showing up? What is the quality of our relationship with ourselves? And I had to kind of relearn, how do you manage those moments when you feel really emotionally charged up or wound up at work? And, so Crystal, I really wanted to start with that discussion, that I think it's really important that we spend more time in a state of self-discovery and self-awareness. In one of the reasons why Martha Finney, my co-author, and I wrote a book back in 2021 called Healing at Work, using workplace conflict as a catalyst for emotional healing, was to wake people up. I was unconscious to how distracted I was in my life because I was so needy of looking for others to validate me. I was disconnected from my kids. I was truly neglecting them emotionally because I was so consumed with being good enough in the workplace. And I also think about how my perfectionism and people pleasing affected all the people I was working with, So I think it's really key that we look at these patterns and trends. And the other thing that I'll share, and then I'll stop talking because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, is that the research shows that nearly 2/3 of us, nearly 67% of us, experienced at least one significant childhood trauma when we were growing up. And there's a lot of great research and study around this, but if you Google the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, you'll find a whole body of information about the fact that 2/3 of us experience one of these 10 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, before the age of 18. And these are really serious, big T trauma, as some people call them. Things like physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, violence in the home, addiction in the home. There's this list of really traumatic things. 67% of adults, when they did the study originally, indicated they had experienced at least one. 40% said they experienced two. And, there's a group of us, myself included, that experienced more than four. And, so we think about all this energy that we carry with us. We go into our workplaces, we create families that we want to be close to. Because of a lot of unconscious patterns and beliefs about ourselves, we are hurting ourselves. I'm lucky to be alive. I'm very grateful to be sober now, almost 21 years. But people are turning to shopping, alcohol, drugs, porn, shopping, or social media. And this is not a place to be the healthiest human. So I'll stop there. I'm very passionate about this topic, but I think it's really important that we spend some time examining ourselves.
No, absolutely. I love how you kind of peel the layer, and thank you for the openness. It's eye-opening. So so my question is, the childhood trauma that you kind of brought into the workplace. Let's talk a little bit about the isolation part of that. I mean,
Yep.
was it something that you kind of isolated yourself because we're one human in a workplace, but also at home, right? I mean, and we may have actually carry different personalities, at work and at home. But how did it play out for you from a let's say an isolation standpoint? And then I will ask a
great
specific
question.
in that. So you were isolated in your mind? Did you actually as a person at work isolated yourself? How did you go about that?
I would say that when we're really caught up in our own limiting beliefs and these what I think are really dysfunctional patterns of behavior. For me, it's people pleasing and perfectionism. For some people, it's bullying. For other people, they try to hide, stay off the radar. It's all fight, flight, freeze behavior because our little amygdala in our brain, the reptilian brain, is in survival mode, and it's there just to protect us. The isolation piece for me was I never felt, my issue was I didn't feel like I was good enough. So I didn't feel like I was accepted. And I would misread things around me and take it as indications to confirm that I wasn't good enough. So if a meeting was happening and I thought I should be in it, if I wasn't in it, I concluded that something was wrong with me, that I had been excluded. And so I for sure had a sensation of feeling it was self-induced. This wasn't necessarily happening, but it's a distorted view of one's experience when you're unconscious to some of these old patterns. And I can tell you, again, just having the privilege to work with so many interesting and complex people throughout those 36 years, how many very successful people feel like they are excluded. They feel like they don't belong. I remember coaching one young man back when I was at Kellogg's, and he was just so sad. And he came into my office and he just said, nobody talks to me. And I don't know if I could stay with this company. And my suggestion to him at the time was, I really would like you to take a look and pay attention to the other people in the room and start to notice how much they also are looking sad or feeling like they don't belong. In other words, this is part of the human experience in the workplace, because so many of us have these, patterns from our childhood that show up, that very successful people are dealing with some of these same underlying fears that they're alone. And again, that place, that unconscious wounded career path where we're unaware of the connection of our past to our present and how much that's influencing every single thing that happens when we're at work, absolutely can foster a perception of isolation. I don't think I was intentionally being excluded, but there were certainly moments. I was often the only woman on a leadership team, so there were definitely moments where I felt alone and isolated. I remember one leadership team I worked with, they were all getting together for a big football team, big football game. My husband always calls them football matches, but the football game. And they were having a big party at one of their houses, and I was the only one that wasn't invited. I remember years ago, some of my colleagues were getting ready to go on a golf outing. And now I don't like golf, but I was taking golf lessons. It was a big part of the culture of the company. And they came to me one day and said, "Hey, Susan, we need a fourth for the golf match tomorrow." And I was sure they were going to ask me. And then they said, "Can your husband come?" Talk about feeling isolated.
Yeah.
But these were all unintentional acts. But when we have this distorted relationship with ourselves that's so heavily influenced by these past patterns, we interpret a lot of things happening around us that lead us to feel lonely and isolated. But again, a lot of it, I think, is self-induced, unconscious self-inducement of feeling isolated.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I look over the landscape of, young and old right now, I mean, loneliness and isolation is a massive problem, and my question to you then is what steps did you actually take to kind of meaningful reconnect back into the workplace and obviously, at home too, I mean, I know that you mentioned about how you overcome your challenge with alcohol and stuff like that. But I mean, when was the time, I guess, is the question, and how did you actually take the first step to kind of overcome that? I think what I'm asking is, what was the handle that you held on to that kind of helped you move forward?
I love that question. And the handle, when I really reflect back on the journey, the handle was God.
Amen.
And honestly, I mean, oh my goodness, where do I even start? I would say that the most difficult day and night of my life was the night my sister died of cancer. And it's a long, very sad story that I won't go into today, but it was a very intense process of her death. And I felt compelled that I had to document every detail of that night. And I just felt like all the details needed to be understood. And again, I didn't really know for what purpose. I just remember being very compelled to write out what had occurred when my sister passed and went to heaven. And that was back in 1991. And, I entered the workforce back in 88. And there were moments on my journey where I just felt like God was guiding me to do things that I didn't really understand. Somewhere along the line, I felt, I remember I was on the management team that was negotiating a big union contract at one of the companies. And when you're in those negotiations, management gives its proposal, union takes it away, and then it can be days before you get back together. So we had a lot of downtime at the hotel. And I just felt compelled. I had to start writing stories of things that had happened in my experiences personally and professionally. And eventually I had this sort of conglomeration of different stories. I didn't really know what to do with it. And I mentioned to one of my mentors that I felt like I was supposed to write a book, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I had just come back from Singapore because I was speaking to about 100 employees at the time, the company I was working for. And the request that they had given me was they wanted me to share about my career. And I thought, nobody likes it when someone stands up and talks about, how great they are. That's like the worst presentation you can hear. So I decided I'd call my presentation The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And what I did was I basically shared stories of good, bad, and ugly things that had happened to me in my life. And as I created it, I realized that the bad and the ugly moments were actually the most important gifts in some respects towards becoming a better leader, towards becoming a more enlightened human being. And I'll never forget it because honestly, I get chills. Like you could hear a pin drop. I was really surprised by the reaction. And when I came back from that trip, my mentor said, that's what you need to write about. But the handle all along was this feeling that I had to keep on a journey of discovery. So I did all kinds of things. I did adult children of alcoholics. I did therapy. I did personal development seminars. I listened to everything I could that would help me figure out what I needed to do differently to have more joy in my life. And it was a long journey. I started writing these stories in 2004. I wrote my sister's in 91. And then eventually it culminated into a manuscript. And it was a long journey. That was 13 years just to get to that. So it was sort of a tedious, just felt like I had to get this thing out of me, but it wasn't me. I wasn't doing it. I was being pulled. And the other big handle was the moment when I was sitting in a hotel room. I had a lot of red wine to drink the night before. I was meeting with a bunch of high-powered consultants, and I felt insignificant and, insecure in that meeting. And I remember knocking over a glass of wine all over the white tablecloth. And I just had this huge sense of humiliation and embarrassment. And the next morning when I woke up in my hotel room, I just sat in the bed and started crying. And I just sensed that I knew that I had a problem with the alcohol. And again, God, I swear, God was like sitting in the room of the hotel room, because I heard him say to me, Susan, you need to stop drinking or you're going to hurt yourself or someone else. And every time I said, I get chills, but that handle was God's hand all along the path, bringing these amazing mentors and advisors and thought leaders into my life that shaped who I was as a human and as an HR practitioner. And it's just been I just feel incredibly blessed. And I feel this sense of purpose, that my purpose is truly to teach self-acceptance, fundamentally teach people self-acceptance to create a more joyful world. And the only way I can do that is by starting on myself. And so that's really been, sort of the process. It's a multi-year journey of realizing that I can't teach self-acceptance unless I'm practicing it. And again, God has been the guide to the whole thing.
Wow, amen to that. So, it's wonderful how we all kind of, to a certain degree, need to get to the end of ourselves first before God can actually start working with us, right? Peeling the layers. So, with that, let me change a little gears here. I mean, if I look at your resume, and I know you too, extremely well as a friend. I mean, you've accomplished so much, over the years. What is the one lesson, that the audience can take home from building strong relationship in the workplace, that you can actually also apply in your personally and family connections, because in the end, it's all about that personal connection, at work and at home, and the intentionality of that. But what is the one lesson from being among all these power players in the world over these years that you actually apply at home? Where's the overlap? How do you connect the dots, in terms of, making good connections?
Well, it's a really important question. And, when I think about my experience of what that means to me in terms of the work in the personal front, is that the piece that was really missing for me for so long was the realization that I wasn't just bringing my adult self into my professional career. I was bringing my child reality with me every single day. And it affected everything. It affected how I interpreted other people's behavior. It affected how I felt about myself. It affected how I behaved. A lot of perfectionists and people pleasers describe being overwhelmed and exhausted. And starting to heal that element of my soul was a really key step towards creating a better connection with myself. And again, it was because of a lot of amazing advisors and mentors and different people, books, et cetera, that I had available. As I started to do that, started to develop a clear sense of me and my capability. And while it's still a journey of focusing on the value, I bring value just by me. I'm just by being me. I don't have to do something to be valued. That's a continued journey for sure. But I will tell you that once I started to go on this path, it helped me get better at speaking up and setting boundaries. So in the past, I'd work, 10, 12 hours a day easily. If there were meetings on the weekend, I would for sure do that, or meetings and calls or whatever. But as I got more clear about my relationship with myself and started to set those healthier boundaries, it enabled me to have a better set of relationships on the home front. And so I think a lot of this is really just acknowledging and recognizing that a lot of the people that you're working with in the workplace, whether they came from a dysfunctional past or had ACEs that they experienced, it almost doesn't matter, because so many people come to me and say, I didn't have any of those traumas, but I still have limiting beliefs. You wouldn't believe the limiting beliefs people share with me that they have that have guided their entire experiences in their careers. One very senior person told me one time, his dad used to say to him, "You can't do anything right." And so he believed he couldn't do anything right. But when he started to heal that, he actually totally changed careers. He went from a very high-powered counterintelligence spy, where if he did something wrong, it would kill people, he literally left the field because of the debilitating feelings that he could never do anything right. And so I guess my key point here is continuing that relationship of helping heal yourself, because when we do that, we become more aware leaders. We become much more aware of some of the behavior going on around us. My belief is that when I see somebody overreacting to something at work and they are emotionally triggered or activated, that it's always fueled by something that happened to them when they were younger. And it helps us to start putting context on other people's behavior. And, I can't help but quote Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You, which is a book where they really look at kids in the school system and kids that are acting up, and how the typical response is to say, what's wrong with you? But their whole approach is to say, I wonder what happened to you. Dr. Perry is a world-renowned neuroplasticity expert, psychiatrist, child expert of understanding the impact of trauma on the childhood brain. And he's really, in partnership with Oprah, teaching the message that rather than saying, we see things at work all the time, we think, what's wrong with that person? What a jerk. I can't believe that person showed up like that. But to shift from that place of judgment, which we're all pretty good at, to becoming curious, to think, I wonder what happened to them. They're unconsciously responding with more fuel because of potentially things that happened to them a long time ago. But my point, though, is that we can start to set these healthier boundaries. So, for example, when I took my job at Applied Materials, which was a wonderful experience, 5.5 years in the semiconductor industry in Silicon Valley. And the culture is hard work, intense, not unlike a lot of Silicon Valley tech companies. And just a culture of, always being ready on time and, doing what needs to get done. That was part of the culture, which is why the company is so successful. It took a lot for me to speak up one time and say to my boss, I'm always available if you need to call me for anything. And I also am hoping that we can manage meetings and calls as much as possible that aren't urgent during the weekday rather than on weekends. Because I already had a divorce to show for working all the time because I never spoke up and set some healthier boundaries. And he was incredibly respectful. And, he'd say, hey, well, can we meet on Saturday? I said, well, how about Friday or Thursday? And he always agreed. He was, it was a whole different experience of starting to create that healthy boundary around taking care of myself and respecting myself enough to recognize that I couldn't just always be on, which is what I've done for the majority of my career, and still have a great relationship with my boss and the people I was working with. So I think whatever we can do to take those steps towards becoming more aware about our own patterns, starting to heal that, those different behaviors and patterns, and there's lots of tools out there to do that. We have to start to show up completely differently for our families and our relationships that matter, because we start to prioritize both work and personal, because both matter.
Wow, there's a lot of truth there. At this point, let me just open it up to the audience a little bit. Do you guys have any questions for Susan before I dive into the last question that I have for the evening? No questions? So Sue, seeing that we're moving on to California and to the fast-paced over there, my question is, in today's fast-paced world, how do we prioritize and maintain the deep, meaningful relationships, both professionally and personally, while balancing the work, family, and other responsibilities? I mean, something that I believe is probably an art and a science, right? And you kind of do that over time, and you learn the trade to do that. But how did you do that? What can you share with us?
A couple of things. First of all, I have the pleasure and privilege of working with my own executive coach. She's amazing. And I spent some time with her after I officially retired from the corporate world about a year ago. And the whole focus of her work was, how do you design a life by soul? And then how do you design a business by soul? And how do you really align to what matters most to you? And I remember one of the exercises she gave me, which I'd never done before, was to get clarity on and sit down and define my personal principles and my professional principles. What really matters to you? And, coming from a deep soul place of things that really matter that I want to prioritize. That was really the first step. And then throughout the time that I've worked with her, she shared different resources. And one that like totally changed my whole approach to time is an amazing book called 4,000 Weeks by a British guy named Oliver Burkeman. And talk about a wake-up call. In his book, he basically teaches you that if you live to age 80, you only have 4,000 weeks of your life. And how do you want to spend the time? Time is our most precious commodity. And so many of us waste it, or we're spending a lot of time worrying and aren't really realizing that. I heard this, actually, I think this was Mel Robbins in her new book, the Let Them Theory, which is excellent also. But she talks about time as like an ice cube. You see it there, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And on my daily to-do list, at the bottom of it, I always write 4,000 weeks. Am I spending the time that I want on the things that matter the most to me? And granted, it's definitely easier to figure out how to manage this when you're not full on working in the corporate world. I get that. Don't believe me, I get that. And I coach a lot of amazing leaders and helping them realize that, busyness, overworking, never enough resources, never enough time won't change unless they change. And that remember that if you're really good at what you do in your job, your organization's always going to want you to do more. And so a lot of this work-life balance is our own, lack of it is our own doing, because of our own neediness to want people to like us, not reject us, and value us. We don't want to disappoint anybody, rather than creating some of those healthy boundaries. And so I think that this whole concept of, how do we manage the work-life balance, everything going on, is first getting really clear about what matters most to you. Becoming really conscious to how precious time is, and then deciding how you want to use that time so that you feel like you've lived a full life. And in fact, the other book, I've just listened to it twice because it was so good. It's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. And he's got many practices. It's a very interesting fable, but the teachings are amazing. But one of his recommendations is every morning you ask yourself, what would I do today if it was my last day? And boy, you talk about a quick orientation of what matters most. All of a sudden you blind up. This is what I want to do today. And we can still do that when we're working. I have a small consulting practice and executive coaching practice. I can align to, all right, am I doing what I love to do? Am I on my mission? Am I on my soul guided path? Those are some things that help me stay straight.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really awesome. Clarity. I mean, that principle of simple clarity holds true for any how shall I put it, division in life almost. I mean, if you think about a business either succeed or fail because of clarity or lack of clarity. Relationships at home, the same thing. It may be probably dressed up a little bit different when it's at home, but when it comes to husband and wife, your relationship with your children, I think you need to have real clarity in a lot of dimensions on how you express yourself, and the time that you want to do and the time you want to commit. So with that, let's close with the audience directed questions, and then we will close it up. Kind of tying that into with the whole conversation that we had with Susan now, and that is, are we as humans designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore? And I'm coming from a human biology standpoint, as I stated earlier. And what I mean by that is, when was the last time you went to bed and woke up with the birds? Went to bed with the birds and woke up with the birds. Think about that, okay? And the reason why I asked that first question is they have figured out there's a natural rhythm to life, right? And they run on a natural rhythm And for some reason, we think we can kind of override that. So that's the first question. Second is, when was the last time you ate only one line whole real foods, for an entire week? Meaning you eat an apple, an egg, a steak, fish, cod, salmon, just one line items for an entire week. And the reason why I ask that is, if you think, again, in the animal world, which we're kind of related to in the sense that we're biological, beings, lions, they hunt and they eat. There's no guy in between that kind of, prepare meals for them in the form of ultra processed foods. And the same with deer. They're even faster. They just graze. So in the concept of whole farm to plate, my question is then, when was the last time we only ate whole foods, one line items for an entire week? And the last question is, when was the last time you actually walked for more than 10,000 steps for 7 consecutive days? And the reason why I ask these 3 simple questions on when we go to bed, what we eat, and how much we move is, I think that speaks of the architecture of we as human beings, as biological creatures. Okay, so to reframe the question then actually is, are we in a normal 24/7 cycle designed to live and eat mostly in isolation for 8 hours, sit in a cubicle for another 8 hours, and then spend the other 8 hours on devices? So I want to open it up to the audience, and then I want to hear what you guys had to say about that. Are we as humans designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore? And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want us to think about that and kind of try and translate back to how we actually live our daily lives and kind of frame that in that context. So you guys can put your answers in the comment section or just speak up, whatever works for you guys.
Well, since I don't like awkward silence, I'll jump in. And Susan, thanks for being here, and love the Let Them book. I'm about halfway through, and I'm really trying to lean into that. Somebody cut me off, and I'm like, okay, we'll let them. Right, now when they cut my 16-year-old daughter off, I'm still working on that piece. But
Yeah.
So love it. You're giving away energy that you don't need to. So, but to your point, Christo, I think it's even. I would say we probably aren't designed that way, but I would also say the world's not designed for us to be that way anymore. And that's the challenge of, I think about what I eat and what I want to eat. And for me, as a middle-aged American that makes better than average money for most everybody in the country, I'm doing okay to be able to get the food I want to, and I still don't do it 90% of the time. So the rest of the world that doesn't have access to that or can't afford that is doing those same things. And then I would say, even outside of sort of the food supply, where we are in just our society, we've been programmed to just work, be on your device. Now we're just starting to recognize sleep matters. Not kind of, it matters a lot, right?
Yeah.
And then the way you sleep, the way you eat, the way you move, that becomes your whole health. And I think we've started to focus on movement for a long while now. We are just starting to focus on sleep right now. And then now we're, I think, just tipping into what does that single line item look like, right? So
that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I heard something this morning really eye-opening from Robert Greene, who I know Chris and I, we've read a couple of his books, and he said, imagine waking up and it's 1,000 years ago, and you wake up and the first thing you realize is there's no mechanical noises at all. No airplanes, no cars, nothing. And that, to just stop and think about that. And he's like, the smells are different, the sanitation situation and everything. But imagine just kind of what your world would be like your mind. What would you think about through the day compared to today, when everything is processed and served right to you visually, on audio and how programmed we are and how susceptible we are to all these just unnatural forces. So I'm gonna try to think. I'm trying to live my life like it's 1,000 years ago. Just get back to the basics in a lot of those ways.
Love it.
Just some of the things you mentioned, are still possible today, but just not necessarily in the United States. I mean, I just got back from Kenya this weekend, and I look at the way I lived my life last week and the way that I'm going to live my life this week. It's the same person, but in two totally different environments, and sort of the demands on my time and the things that are available to me are just so drastically different in both places. But the same body equips to both. And so, to your original question, I think there's a lot of things that our bodies allow us to do and give us the opportunity to do, but we've taken a lot of that away because of all the other things that surround us that are so much easier to sort of almost fall back on. But it doesn't mean we still can't get back to that. It's just a matter of creating that in your own life. And some people, I think they do that by the seasons of their life. And so retirement looks much different to them than, their 40s and 50s, which looks much different than when they have little kids at home running around and chasing them and their dreams and stuff. And so it's just marvelous that we've been created in such a way that we have the ability to adapt to all the things that change around us. But the original thing that we've been given with is still amazing in a lot of ways, but I don't think we necessarily appreciate that as much anymore, which it can be kind of sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Susan, what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking about the work that you're doing, Christo, relative to really trying to completely innovate the health system in the United States. And I think what's not going to work is the current health system in the United States, because it's all about treatment and not prevention.
Yeah.
And so I think about, you're right, the world isn't what it was before, but we have to have a completely different way of thinking about our life, our health, and our healthcare through the lens of preventative. And the things you mentioned, sleep, eating, and moving, are three core components to how do you manage a healthier body so that it can get you through, whatever the new world looks like. And I think the challenge for many is that we become reliant on things that are fast and simple because a lot of our underlying beliefs are driving us to perform all the time at work. So we feel like we have to spend all of our time in the workplace being successful. And therefore, there's no time to create healthy meals. There's no time for exercise. And I think that that's going to kill a lot of people. And I know that's why you're on the mission that you're on. And, so thinking about how do you start changing how you take care of your body, and then how we interact with the medical world, I think are going to be critical problems or opportunities, however you want to look at them, that need to be solved into the future. I just think people have become very dependent. And again, I think a lot of the underlying reasoning is that people aren't putting work as a first priority, and they're not putting themselves or their family or their health or the quality of their movement and all the sleep. I mean, good heavens, my sleep for all my years of my career, I just didn't value it. And I wish I could go back 40 years and do some things differently. But that's what I think about, is I think that this major shift that needs to happen in the medical system, as well as how people think about their responsibility and accountability to take care of their bodies through the things that you talked about, sleep, eating, and moving. I personally think movement is the foundation of youth. I mean, the fountain of youth. I really do.
Awesome. Yeah. So, the way I think about a lot of these things is that, and in particular to this point, is we actually we live in the most wonderful time ever. If you think about what we have available right now in terms of everything. Food, yes, there's a ton of ultra processed foods. Technology, I mean, ChatGPT and ultra super intelligence, that is coming down the stream. So we live in this wonderful time. I think what we do need for that, in order to kind of dance correctly with that going forward, probably from a grassroots up, is a new social contract, to your point, Susan, on how to think about health, right? Because I think right now we're sitting roughly at a 95 to 5% ratio of cure versus prevention. And if we can just move the needle maybe to a 50-50, where people that's why I'm gonna coin the phrase home as health, start thinking from their health standpoint, not the 7 or 18-minute doctor visit per year, but just try to start making small interventions on a daily basis at home, So I think, we need a complete new social contract in order to kind of make that happen, to shift that needle all the way from a 95-5 to maybe a 50-50. I mean, in my world, I would love to see a 5-95, where everything's preventive care, because, if you actually do that, I mean, there are awesome places in the world like the blue zones. I mean, if you just think about what those guys are doing, to Tom's point, coming back from Africa, their system is so environment is so simple, and they live by these principles. I mean, the 3 basic stuff that I just put down there, and I, by the way, side note, those 3 points can actually change the entire health system around in America if we all actually go to bed with the birds. And that's what people do in Africa. If it's dark, it's dark. You go to bed, simple as that. And then you wake up early. I mean, I've never seen a cardinal in Africa, actually go to bed at 1 at night and wake up at noon the next day. It just doesn't work like that, because you understand the natural rhythms. And the same thing for eating, whole foods. The people just live off the land. And then the last one is, I mean, they move. I mean, they need to go and find some food and whatnot. And I think, we've on the one hand drifted a little bit away from that, towards everything is done for us because we live in this fast-paced world. But on the other hand, it's really only a choice away, right? I mean, because we have all the best of both worlds, in particular here in the US, and for the whole Western world for that matter. I think we just need to have the right guardrails set up, probably from a parenting or a home perspective. But yeah, that's where I'm coming from on that. So I think from a to end that up, we are actually completely out of sync with how our epigenetics or our epigenetics give expression, to our genetics. So, but yeah, that's that. You guys want to add anything else to that? No. Okay. Sue, with that, let's close this good podcast here. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. As always, it's wonderful to spend time with you, even so much more on the podcast. So thank you so much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for hopping on. I really appreciate it. And God bless you guys, and have a wonderful evening. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Sue.
Yep. Bye.